Hello. I am Chris from Air Windows, and we are successfully launching another stream. Yay. I've been trying to have breakfast and being so slow and discombobulated about it that I kind of put it away and didn't actually finish. Hey, Bernard, because sometimes I just can't manage stuff. But for the moment, what we're going to do is manage this. And I'm going to put the... I have a web browser open so that I can see chat and I can see Bernard. And I'm going to put the other web over to GitHub, just in the off chance that somebody starts asking questions about how plugins are coded, because I'm always prepared to do that. And having got here, I will say hello. I've been having a really interesting time. Oh, you have summertime as well. It's starting to be summertime. I actually have the wood stove working at the moment. I probably won't want to run around checking it, but I have a log in there that might not burn properly because it's too large, and I'm not going to be leaving the stream constantly to go and poke the fire. Although I suppose I could turn the camera around and do that. So I have been... a little overstressed, but not so much because of making plugins as last year's family tragedy stuff flared up again, and not so much in the sense of adding more tragedy, although I did have some awkwardness to deal with, but in the sense of having to do stuff. Namely, last year my mom and my dad died fairly in close succession, even though they weren't getting along with each other super duper well. But they lived in a house in Pennsylvania, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, where my sister actually lives now. So in their last years, they got to have one of their kids and their kid's family living literally right down the street, which is very sweet, and it's a very cool thing. And we gave them pretty much as nice of a end of the life as we possibly could. And now we're sort of tidying up the stuff because the house that they were in needs to get sold off. And my sister is mostly in charge of that, but she can't do it all on herself. Hey, gents. By the way, this is live chat, so if things get ugly or messy in the chat, I can switch it over to top chat or whatever. I don't have any fixed plans as far as that's concerned. But I have been rather distracted because I have many fixed plans for this family stuff that I'm mentioning. And one of them is we got to clean that freaking house up because it's they were kind of, I come from this kind of upper middle classy family. That's one of the reasons I'm still alive, being Chris from Air Windows, because I think somebody from a different background could have needed the same life that I had, but wouldn't have got it. And this motivates my politics. This motivates my choices about doing the open source and all of that kind of stuff. Because I can't justify it, like I'm not any more special than anybody else. I had certain kinds of opportunities that I used in a weird way. You know, like I don't have money exactly, but I have had a lot of time. I have had a lot of time to think about digital audio stuff. I'm talking decades of time. And that costs something. You know, many other people in my situation would not have been able to do that. They wouldn't have been able to continue to survive, even in great poverty and the struggles have had, disability and stuff. But many other people would not have survived that process. And since I did, I got to use the time to focus on a number of different things. And, if I have a life goal, honestly, it would be to get as many other people as possible, leave the ladder down, not be like the guy in, I think, Moby Dick, who is a preacher, so he climbs up to this thing with the rope ladder, and then he pulls the ladder up after him and he gives his speech. It's like, that's not what I'm about. I want people to join me in being able to do what I've done. Oh, thanks, Bernard. Bernard has seen my new plugin, High Pass 2. It's neat. I felt that I couldn't tell the difference between the loose and the tight settings nearly as easily as the way that the Low Pass 2 has a clear distinction between those funny sliders. But I still think that it has a lot of uses. So what I have done lately is I bolted down to Pennsylvania, which was like 6 hours of driving, and I did almost 5 hours of it all at once. And I had a bunch of emotional stuff because the same brother who helped me get the VST plugins together, and you all, I'm not going to get into a lot of personally, he would not want that, but you guys owe this brother of mine a lot of affection and friendship because he has helped me do some of the things that have helped people most. Quickly, I'll answer Thomas's question because this is going to be a little scattered, I think, today. I've gotten a little rest, so I'm no longer as wiped out as I was over the weekend, but I'll answer Thomas, and I'll try to keep an eye on questions and answer them as they come along. For live use, I absolutely would recommend zero latency plugins. And I've got a whole bunch of them, and I try to always flag that checkmark on the AirWindows website so that you can look them up by that metric. Because the thing about live use is you probably don't want to deal with the latency of going into digital and doing your thing and stuff anyway. But if you were doing live use and using, like, I don't know, virtual instruments maybe, or maybe you're being a very silly person and plugging your guitar into the computer so that your Marshall stack is actually a plugin. Oh, what a terrible idea. And then you wanted to use plugins on that, then the last thing you'd want is plugins with latency because it would just all start adding up and you'd be really, hey, Bo managed to make it to the stream, yay. So the quick and simple answer for the plugins is I would totally recommend trying to choose low latency plugins. Mikhail Celestin, I have a wave folder. Look at Fracture. I'm sure I've got Fracture out. Fracture is literally, that's what it is. It is a wave folder. That's how it does the thing that it does. And the way that it's doing it is by taking a sine function and not clamping it, so that as you continue to go, past the hump of the sine wave, it goes back down to 0 and then into negative again. So yeah, you could say that I've considered that because you have it in its fully updated, other than the most recent like dithering thing, which I haven't fully rolled out. Go look at Fracture. I'm going to double check and make sure that it is still here. I don't have a low pass gate, but that is something that I might add. But let's have a look. I'm scrolling down. Bingo. We have Fracture. You already have the wave folder. You just had to ask the question, and that's why I do this live stream. Enjoy. But yeah. Well, it's easy to miss because there's 150 freaking plugins. So, I'm going to have to devote my attention to trying to figure out ways of letting people connect with what they need, which is always difficult. I have one fellow who is emailing me a bunch now and then, and I'm giving rather quick answers because he's asking the wrong questions. And basically he's going, tell me how to do the RCA studio from the 1950s that Elvis Presley used. And I'm saying, okay, first of all, I can't. And second of all, it's not going to make you Elvis. But I'm not saying that latter part. But I'm thinking it. And all I can do is be like, okay, well, Bus Colors Tube does a thing that is kind of like old tube gear, which is not necessarily all soft and rolled off either. And, he'll ask, I tried to use Tube Desk because he's, the word tube for him is doing the thing. And he'll be, going, oh, I tried to use Tube Deck and it is broken because there's no sliders. And I'll write back, yeah, it's working. It's fine. It doesn't have sliders. Stuff like that. But there's other times when people will come with questions like that. Like if you ask me, can you make me a wave folder plugin? I'll be like, ta-da! There you go, it's done. And that's always lots of fun. So let me see. Let me scan over the... Yeah, Bernard, I completely agree as far as being able to take time. And that's the thing, is in the world that we largely live in most of the time, and I'm also describing something that tends to take over, there's an imperialist, colonialist quality about this economic model. I personally am happy to call it neoliberalism, but other people have all different attitudes around these things. So I'm not going to hammer any of this into the ground as far as opinions on the subject. But I will say that being able to have time is tied to being able to have money, because a lot of things are boiled down by society to having money. And I think this has perverse effects on many things. And it is my job to resist them. Now, one of the things I wanted to do was start showing stuff around, because in going back and cleaning out my parents' place, or at least beginning the process, because I'm going to need to do more, it was also possible to grab stuff that otherwise will end up going to a dumpster. And all of my siblings are doing better than me financially, so none of them were like, oh my God, I do not have a mixer. I desperately need these bowls and spoons. None of them are like that, and nobody really wants to be grabby, so everything is kind of just sitting there waiting to be thrown into a dumpster finally. And I anticipate a certain amount of people fussing over that. But, also I mentioned there was a certain amount of emotionality there. It isn't so much about losing mom and dad last year, because we did the best that we could, and I intend to show you some things that I brought back finally. I didn't have until, over the last week I did this journey. But I have done things like draw stuff for my dad, because he always loved comics. And in fact, I've got some things. I'll put the headphones on, but I've got stuff like old comic books. This is the comic Pogo I grew up with, and he loved these things like more than anything. And he was a scientist, so this is a teeny little moon globe. I'm a science fiction writer, so I'm going to be drawing a map of tunnels onto this globe that fits with a creative thing that I'm doing. Oh, and let's get this reachable. I'm going to try to have the microphone working normally as much as possible. And my father's father was a vice president at Chevrolet. I've mentioned this before. This is the proof. I've actually gone and looked up, okay, is this an incredibly valuable lamp? And the answer is no, not really. But this is given to high achieving Chevrolet people and vice presidents and stuff for great achievement. It used to have a little plaque. I'm not sure what happened to it. And it's the coolest. It's like this little brass car. It's a brass car lamp. And I intend to put a nice LED in it and get it to fit together properly. There you go. And put it somewhere so that it can be visible in my streams, because modular music making streams on YouTube is often benefited by having houseplants and things. Like there is the YouTuber Annie, and I recently watched a DivKid interview with Annie, and Annie is like this tiny young. I couldn't really pin it down, Asian, Filipino, something like that. This tiny, young, clever man that makes this beautiful music and has some tattoos. I don't know where he got the tattoos. You see them in the videos. But I thought that Annie, both of those are female names, and so I thought Annie was female. And it was kind of neat to discover that. But Annie is also known for these beautiful environments and, houseplants and things, and this very meditative music that's not being meddled with very much. So for me, I'm not as much of a houseplant person, but for me, something as funky as that lamp is very suitable to having in stream somehow. And it's the same kind of thing. It's like you see it and go, that's cool. What is that? What is the story behind that? It's a weird thing. It looks like a car. It's a brass car with a lamp. And, all of this kind of stuff, it's like, it's neat, it's eye-catching, and it's also part of my life and history. And also there's a story behind it, which is part of the story I'm telling regarding like economics and how the world works, in that I think people should have more opportunities like those I've had as just a normal society thing. I think society would be better if more people were able to have time to do stuff. You shouldn't have to be the grandson of a Chevrolet executive. And granted, shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations, it's like I don't have the wealth of a vice president of Chevrolet, not even close. I'm not going to through anything that happens from the estate, even after selling this house. I might be able to continue buying myself literally all the time, ever. And so I will have been able to have spent my entire life by the time it ends, and hopefully it'll keep going for some time. My folks lasted for a good long time, so that's a good point. But hopefully I'll be able to buy myself just a continuation of Chris from Air Windows, and rather than making a good living or having the usual things like an economic security and jobs and stuff, I used time to think about stuff and understand things. That's who I want to be, and I'm going to see whether I can't do it. But then there's also other things, and I will come back briefly to, I mentioned, emotional troubles and a brother and stuff, and it's not so much that I'm distressed about my parents, because I did, I'm going to comment what Bo just said, which I'm double checking to make sure that all of this is coming through in the stream. Yup. All good. Bo, hunger is a political issue. The survival of the people is a political issue. We're already at an efficiency point where everything could be completely fine and just luxurious and chill. And we passed that point some time ago. The reason we don't see it is because people's societal dynamics means that after the robot takeover, people could still be using their relative positions in society to enforce classes where somebody is good and important because they have all the stuff, meaning that other people don't have all the stuff, kind of on the principle of the thing. So, after the robot takeover could lead to like, okay, one dude has $27 trillion, everybody else has nothing, and they're actually living really rough and things suck for them. Simply because people collectively decided, oh, we need to have a hierarchy, we need to have a ranking system. You go to a rather silly man, Jordan Peterson, believing that people behave like lobsters and naturally have hierarchy. He's buying into that that's a good thing, but he does have a point in that it's easy for us to jump to that conclusion. And it is more difficult for us, although also quite natural, for us to cooperate and want to thrive as communities. And then it is also limited by the fact that if we do thrive as communities, there is a specific number, which is around 250 to 300, where that's about as a big of a village as you can get, and then it's all strangers. So I think that's Dunbar's number, if I'm not mistaken. If anybody is dialing into this thinking that this is about Air Windows plugins questions, first of all, I'm so sorry, because I'm going to spend 2 hours going all over the map, I believe. But secondly, ask a question about plugins, and I will try to spot it and answer it immediately. Because, for instance, going back to Mikhail Solstin's question about the low-pass gate, one of the things that interests me is building the hardware devices. I will build Vactrols out of LEDs and cadmium sulfide cells because I've got lots of those. And naturally, if I'm building them, I can also measure them. So I should be able to... It's more like, when do I take the time? I'll take a half an hour and start measuring waveforms going through CDS cells. And, when I do that, I will make note of what it's doing, and then I'll be able to do a model of it, and then you'll have your plugin. So Thomas has a question. Always interrupt me with the actual plugin questions, because I got to consider that most important. Although I do want to, do a little bit of the family stuff, because rather than just sort of griping about old school experiences or whatever, I have nice, pretty heartwarming things today, and I want to share them with you. Because I might as well, and because why not? So Cubase, pre or post faders. Console 5. I think that's a great idea. Thomas, as you can see, is asking, should I put Console 5 channel on the post fader? And I'm like, oh goodness, yes, I'd love for people to be able to do that. A lot of DAWs don't even let you put things on post fader. Post fader is literally where it's supposed to go. Good call. So, the same brother that helped me port to VST was a little upset because I bolted down to Pennsylvania without asking him. In fact, I was like, are we still on for you coming over on Sunday? Which he did. And we were going to do some programming on a game that I'm developing, which is also on the GitHub. And instead I bolted down, and he had this feeling like, oh, okay, so you don't want to see me anymore? And I'm like, no, but it's just difficult to manage these things, and scheduling with my two brothers was becoming so difficult that I was like, the hell, I'm just bolting. And I zipped down there because my sister is much more spontaneous as far as these kinds of things are concerned, and I have keys to that house, so no matter what happens, I could get in there and work on clearing things up, because it is going on the market. So hey, if anybody is in Pennsylvania and is incredibly wealthy and wants to buy Chris from Air Windows' parents' old house, then look it up when it goes online, or ask me about it privately or something, because it's really very good. I can tell you all the details and personal private stuff about that. So back to the actual plugin questions. Envy and MIDI-verb. I'm going to correct you about one thing. Envy is not MIDI-verb. It's inspired by. That's why it's not named MIDI-verb. MIDI-verb has a bunch of algorithms, and none of the algorithms are the same as Envy. In fact, there's an algorithm that is like what's in Envy, but I think it's in MIDI-verb too. There's specifically an algorithm called Bloom, and I'm pretty sure that's the one. I'll get to the programming environment in a moment. What MV is a bunch of all-pass filters in series, and the delays of each of them are as long as a single slapback echo, but all passes are like partly feedback and partly not. And the reason it's based on MIDI-verb is because in MIDI-verb, all of the all passes use a minus 6 dB multiplier. So the all passes that are in MIDI-verb are like the ones in MV because they have to be, because MIDI-verb and MIDI-verb 2 don't have multipliers that can do anything other than a single bit shift. There goes my YouTube monetization again. They're so fussy about that word. Yeah, you're quite welcome. So the delays are actually kind of long, and the Bloom algorithm is a series of delays. And MV is specifically the Bloom algorithm that is somewhat modifiable. You can change the lengths of it and change how many stages are in there. And you can also pick how many of the stages of the full range are doing a average filter in the end, which can also be done with the 0.5 amplify multiplier. But and I don't know how much of that MIDI verb is using, although I wouldn't be surprised if they were doing a roll-off using that average technique, because that's another thing. You can just, okay, add the two things, multiply by 0.5, and then you have a kind of filter, and it's very cheap and easy. So they might be using that. So MV is part of what's in MIDI verb. The actual reverbs in MIDI verb also use delays that aren't all passes. And they use stuff like that in order to, I don't know the exact algorithms. They're probably very simple. I've never actually tried to exactly mimic what's in there. But, and MV is technically, literally because of what I just said about MIDI verb 2, MV is not unique, but it is a very useful form of a old school no multiplier section and Bloom algorithm. So also what I'm saying is if you love MV, you can get stuff like it in vintage digital analog. You can go and get the MIDI verb 2 and look up the Bloom algorithms, because that's what it is. So you can have that in hardware. You can have that in vintage digital hardware too. So yeah, quickly, the programming environment in IDE I use, it's on a old Mac laptop running, it's Snow Leopard 10.6.8, Mac OS X 10.6.8. That's an older one. And it's using a Xcode that is appropriate for that time, because that is the last one that I could find that will still compile for PowerPC. And that laptop is also running a virtual machine, two virtual machines, as needed. And one of them is running Windows 7, and that is like Visual Studio Community Edition. And then there's another virtual machine, and that is running a Linux environment, which I believe is that Music Studio Linux, but I'm not actually using it as such. It's just, I had to install some form of Linux to do this. And it's not actually being updated very much, and that's partly because it's in functioning order and it's compiling the plugins that I need. So as long as the format of the plugins doesn't change, then all of those operating systems exist kind of as time capsules. And that means I have my backups, and also that nothing is likely to happen to the IDEs or the operating systems that would change it in such a way as to break anything that works. The only thing that can really happen is going forwards, if people make new digital audio workstations that break their ability to work with existing plugins. First of all, that's a huge bug and bad. But then second of all, that would be the only way that the Airwindow stuff would break. I've got it set up in such a way where as long as I can keep, backups of that kind of stuff and continue to find either computers or virtual machines that can run the computers that'll run that stuff, then I'll be able to build the plugins and be sure that it hasn't broken something. My fear there is mostly that I'll be running, making plugins and something changes, and all of a sudden somebody that has been using my stuff on their old machine that has been built into the wall of their studio or something, who knows? Or, it's their machine that has all of, 64 tracks of I/O, but it's a PowerPC machine because it's like super antique, top of the line something, and works fine for audio. That, the prospect of having something happen where all of a sudden my stuff is broken for that person doesn't sit well with me. So I am maintaining like time capsule programming environments and IDEs on a antique operating system that usually doesn't, like especially the Windows and Linux forms, do not, I've just been distracted by the new question. Those virtual machines don't see the internet ever. So they're kind of confined within the IDE, and I don't let them see Wi-Fi or anything like that. And so they don't get to update themselves, which I'm more concerned about with the Windows. And I'm not so much concerned about that with the Linux, but it's still capable of doing it, and it's also capable of breaking itself if like somebody wasn't doing the update right. So Zafor is asking, would you want anyone to put up a mirror for the Windows legacy? Hell yeah. That's why the stuff, the source code is on GitHub, and the source code is MIT licensed. So, I mean, you get to build on and continue to use that stuff, not just save it. And then also, I've repeatedly said, take the newest version of newupdates.zip and like torrent it, get it out there. I don't really run torrent things. Like if I want to watch something to see whether I want to buy the DVD of it or something, I will make use of that sort of stuff and then typically not keep it. And that means I'll only be running a torrent thingy like while doing that, and I'm not very good at seeding. But if I was, I would be having the most recent new updates.zip and all that stuff sitting on my private seeding server all the time, and probably nobody would care because this is a popularity thing. And I should answer Bernard's question about the High Pass 2. I find that a little difficult myself. It doesn't work as well as the hard and soft in low pass, although it's the same mechanism. It's just using the low pass with that same mechanism, but subtracting it from the sound, and that gives you the high pass. So it's like a mirror image thing. And the idea with loose and tight with the lows is, in theory, you should be able to set it so that you're high passing at a certain point, blocking off low frequencies. If you scooch it over towards loose or tight a little bit, it'll start lowering it again. But if you do it towards loose, it should be trying to high pass more for loud stuff and not quiet stuff. And if you scooch it up towards tight, it should start letting through more lows for loud stuff and making the high pass be higher for quiet low frequency stuff. So in theory, tight would be good for cleaning up wobbly low bass while still allowing it. There's probably ways of fooling with it to more clearly work out how it is, and the examples I gave are probably not those ones. So what I would do is, like, if you're using it on some kind of instrument, maybe that instrument will show you more clearly what it's about. Like, put high pass, assuming that you would want to do such a thing, put high pass on a kick drum. I can actually think of some ways that would be good. Put high pass on a kick drum that has like some rattle and rumble, and then start exploring by going like, okay, set it to tight. Is this letting it do a lot of thump? And then it tightens up and cuts off faster, because a kick drum will have like overhang and rumble, or fool with loose and see like, okay, does this make it be higher frequency and more punchy when it's loud? And then it has some sustain in the lows and continues to rumble afterwards. Those would be ways you could get use out of the loose-tight thing. But, depending upon how it works, it's not nearly the same as the low-pass 2 filter, where you could do various things and hear a big difference between the two character-wise. Instead, you kind of have to know what it's doing. And it's pretty harmless even if you're not knowing what it's doing or doing anything effectively, because it's a strange little mechanism anyway. I mean, it's just a thing that, other people's filters don't have because it's kind of weird. And when you listen to it, it's kind of like, what is that doing? But that's cool too, because you never can tell when you might need to, having a look at the wood stove, when you might need to use something that's a little different and off the beaten path. So yeah, until other people are asking questions about plugins, I'll go back to telling you about what was going on this last weekend. And drinking a little more coffee. Here's the thing. I can do on stream, and you can see whether I'm deeply touched by it. Check this out. I do have a plan for this, and it's an interesting plan, and I think I want to do this plan, and can do it basically right now. You'll have to let me go off stream for a second. This is a gift. I made this for my dad when I was a little tiny child. It's a little pirate ship. It says the Jolly Roger. NJ is his name, Norman Johnson. And those are the original tissue paper sails. One of them's a little broken, but I mean, this is upwards of 40 years old. And it's a value to absolutely nobody. It's not a very good piece of artwork, because a little tiny child made it. It's a rather impressive piece of technology for a little tiny child to make. It's not easy to keep around. And for me, it feels maybe a little hurtful and not the kind of thing that I want, because for me, it has always been a failure. And I'll tell you why. It's this lovely little model. Granted, if you look at it head on, it's not very, it's not the most accurate model, but it's kind of like hand carved and stuff. And it was really a very impressive thing for such a little tiny kid. And this is a nail. This was always meant to float. And I think what happened here, and this is a very Chris thing, but also the fact that it's still here is a very dad thing. I think I may have made it and carefully put it aside, thinking like, I am going to give this to Dad, and then I will go, and now let's go and fill the bathtub, and we'll take it in its first sail together. And you realize what would happen with this, if you tried to sit it in water, is this is not a heavy enough, like the amount of balsa wood underneath this nail is already enough to make it try floating sideways or upside down. I don't remember the details, but I remember in sort of general strokes that this was crushing to me because I had made this and it was for my dad. And I'd gone to a lot of trouble and he was really very impressed by it. And then we took it out for its maiden voyage and it fell over and floated on its side. And I freaked out. Like, I think it went upside down and the sails were like literally soaking wet and tearing and everything. And I was like, oh my God, everything is ruined. My life is over. And so my dad had to basically take care of me, which he wasn't really great at doing, and try to soothe me down from like a full-blown autistic child meltdown. Because here's the thing, and I know from personally growing up, and that's before people understood any of this kind of stuff. Like, I wasn't a heartless little robot of a child as an autistic child. Like, I was probably ignoring everybody while I did this, but it meant something to me that I wanted to make the pirate ship for my dad. But having decided that, it was like, okay, I'm not going to buy one. I'm going to make one, but it has to be exactly right. And I decided that it had to be exactly right. And then I gave it to him, and he had, he is a lot like me. And he was stunned by this that I've been able to make, but then he had to deal with the fact of like, okay, so the same child that has made this wonderful thing is now flipping the heck out because it floated on its side and it got wet and it became a bunch of emotional labor and stuff. So I've always remembered how hurt and how upset I was. But you'll notice another thing is that my dad always kept this. And he can't anymore because he's not there. But we have some Scandinavian heritage. And you know what they used to do with Vikings for Viking funerals? They would send you out in a longboat and set it on fire. I got a wood stove over there, and this thing that is made of incredibly flammable, delicate wood that was fairly tricky to even transport. I don't need to keep it. I felt like it kind of didn't work. And my dad was actually cremated. How's about I send him this boat, like, now? I'm going to put it in a fire because it is very flammable, being balsa wood and stuff. And I'll be like, over to you. and he will be reunited with the ship that I built for him. And maybe, you know, in the spiritual realm of whatever, wherever like scientists go, because he was not a spiritual dude. But in whatever realm that is, he can like be actual size for this boat and sail away on it. So I'm going to take a moment and do that. Sure enough, I really should have been fussing with this fire, because it did not do quite what I thought it was going to do. Happy sales, Dad. That boat is going to join him in their respective states of cremation. Because it was never about me, it was for him. It'll go where he went, and I will get the nail out later. And there, that can be another strange Christopher Mayer Windows live stream, the kinds of things you don't see every day. There's a real history behind that, and I feel like that was the right thing. That said, I've got some other stuff that I can show you before I, and you can still interrupt me with plug-in questions and things. I'm going to answer this thought about preamps and things. My thoughts about preamps have been fairly simple. And they're kind of influenced by the sound technician William Whitman, also known as Weedy Wet, who did Cyndi Lauper's "She's So Unusual" album. And William's opinions on preamps are very simple. Get a good brand of preamp. There are like two. You can have API and you can have Neve. Those are the top of the line. And technically, if you got something weird and boutique that was like that, then fine, get all that. Get the one kind of preamp and use that. And I used to have two, because back in the day I was able to invest in Air Windows at one point, and I did smart things with it. I have one API 3124 preamp, which is, that is worth about as much as most of the cars I've ever owned. Not the current one, because the current one's a little newer. That's how I was able to get down to Pennsylvania. I still owe a bunch of money on it. Hopefully I'll be able to pay that off at some point, and I'll have one less bill per month. I'm going to be writing out a check for that car payment today, in fact, after I get off stream. But I have a API pre. It's a rack-mountable 4-channel microphone pre. And that is, I would use that for anything. Like literally, guitar amps, whatever. And I don't know if there's a rack-mountable 4-channel Neve pre. I kind of like the APIs for this reason, is that I can get these configurations of them that are pricey, but they're good. And there's also a side benefit to it, which is if you have like some horrible monster fake tube thing with all blinky lights and a window through which you can see the glowing tube and stuff, and you put some of that stuff in the rack, and you also have a bunch of API pre's, people will steal the garbage that has fancy lights and blinking lights and things. And they will ignore the API pre that is more valuable because it looks too boring. So that's kind of cool. I mean, API is my kind of preamplifier maker because it's really boring looking. It's like the pre-version of an Air Windows plugin. You just got some buttons, and you got a little light, and you got a little knob, and inside you've got some extremely fancy custom-made microphone amplifiers and a bunch of big transformers. APIs are not tube preamplifiers, but they are transformer-based preamplifiers, and you can get a lot out of that. Like they're really good. They're really good. So I guess those are my favorite. I mean, I realize Neve also has literally top of the line as much as you would ever need from anything. And it's not just all about the API, but it's fairly distinct. And I'm generally not particularly concerned with getting more preamplifiers or fooling with flavors of preamplifiers, because it's kind of like what William Whitman said. Just get one kind that is exceptional and as good as you will ever need, and just only use that. Now, William goes a step farther. He gets the one kind of preamplifier and just only uses that, and then also gets one microphone that is exceptional and only uses that. And I don't go quite as far as that. Like, he will get like some kind of nice Neumann mic or whatever, and he'll be using it on absolutely everything, as well as using the same preamplifier on everything. And he'll be using it on things like guitars and guitar amplifiers. And here's what happens there. If you do that, you will get guitar sounds that will stand up there with, like, for instance, classic Beatles. Because what they did with the classic Beatles was they put the good microphones at Abbey Road up against them. And, you know, I keep wanting to say BBC or something. It's like the engineers, EMI, I think it is. The EMI engineers, all in their white lab coats and stuff like that, they were putting like old German condenser microphones and stuff up against these amplifiers, typically at a bit of a distance. And then sometimes fussing because it's like, turn it down, it's too loud. And, you know, and some of these things don't go together. Here's another example of something you can do doing the William Whitman thing. Like, William is endorsing picking like Neve or API and using that as preamplifiers. And I think neither of them are tube. Yep. And picking a exceptional microphone of some kind. Like, I do have a large diameter condenser microphone. It's a studio project, and I hacked with it a lot. It's about a $200 microphone, and I did a bunch of electronic foolery with it. So it is good sounding. I don't tend to use it for like anything. If I did vocals, I might start using that more, but I tend to favor cheap-ass Shure mics for a couple of reasons. And if you consider, say, like Pink Floyd's Wish You Were Here album, for instance, Wish You Were Here, Shine On You Crazy Diamond, that first guitar part, dong, 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 it's very vibey. It's amazing. You do not get that sound with the SM57. You do not get that sound with like modern rock guitar recording techniques. Because what that is a amp in a big room, and the microphone is a good quality condenser mic, just the kind that William Whitman would be using, at a distance of about 20, 30 feet. So it has a lot of character because it's in like Abbey Road Studio A, it's a classical recording room, and all of the ambience around it is literally natural acoustic sound. And touch one of the Abbey Road 2-tracks machines. I would totally do that. And be like, as I touch the machine. So William's thing is certain sounds, it is absolutely correct to do that. Like, you don't fuss around a lot about like which kind of preamp you're using or which kind of microphone you're using. If you're doing stuff like that Shine On You Crazy Diamond intro, where you've got the and by the way, if I get to the, I think it's $1,500 point, I start doing a Wednesday stream that's all about talking just like this and playing you stuff. In fact, I have recently discovered a musician. I don't remember his name off the top of my head because I just discovered him yesterday. But like a guy from the band Wings of the Pegasus or something, and he is currently making huge numbers of videos in which he's basically playing somebody else's YouTube video. And then he stops it and he's commenting about it. And I think the neat thing about him, like I first saw him and I was like, huh, okay, that's weird. And then I kept seeing more and more and like, oh, okay, that's weird. Boy, he's really into this. And I started listening to what he was doing. And I went, whoa, okay, you found some really cool stuff. But also, not only is he playing the stuff and then commenting on it, he is incredibly positive, this guy. In fact, you know something? I bet I can take half a minute and just, because I was looking at him from my YouTube account. So if I go to YouTube and look at anything, even one of my own videos, I'll probably be shown his stuff. Yeah, like I'll go to here and not watch this video. And yep, sure enough. So the guy's YouTube channel is called Wings of Pegasus. And his name is, his voice is blowing my ear out because my headphones are set wrongly and it changes the levels, so he's cranked me to the full crank. But his name is Phil, F-I-L, Phil. And I'm switching that off because this is not a time for me to listen to his videos. But he's listening to other people's videos, and then he stops it and he starts commenting on it and commenting on it and commenting on it. He never plays the whole thing, and he stops it part of the way, and then he just starts talking about the things he's observing in it. And again, this guy is so positive, and he's operating currently. Like, he's doing this now. He's doing, you know, footage of like Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young playing on stage doing something and talking about what he thinks about that. You know, he'll play the video and go, let's see how they're getting on. And it seems as if he is really testing successfully what it means currently to be doing fair use on YouTube. And if it's working for him, it will work for me. So let's all get me up to that 1500 level, and I will start playing stuff off of my classic vinyl records and deconstructing them for you. Never entire songs, and it'll be just like what he's doing. Hopefully with the same amount of extreme positivity, because it just feels good to me that somebody is finding success, you know, considerably more than I'm having, but then he is a YouTuber, and I'm not primarily a YouTuber, I'm primarily a programmer. So that is something I would totally emulate, and go Phil. Phil is awesome. Let me see. Now, where was I? There was a number of things, and one of them was I've just sent, that's probably already headed on its way to Dad's Viking. This is not the kind of thing where I would have buried him with that little ship. Not that he was buried. I wouldn't have cremated him with the little ship and had it literally happen because nobody else would have got it, but that's kind of what I see about it. I think I was beginning to explain that he had other stuff. He had stuff I had given him. And I'll show you some of those things because now I have them back. I didn't last week or the previous one. For instance, this is a tiny oil painting just on a little piece of canvas. And I did that. I painted stuff. This is sort of vaguely in the Salvador Dali color arrangements and things. And I'd been sending him art because he was super into art. You know, there were things that I kept and treasured. Like I painted this one. This is a watercolor thing. And I always felt like, wow, I don't usually do stuff this good. And I sent it to him. Because, I mean, that if I scanned it properly, that'd be like album cover material. The way the moon is underneath the clouds comes out really good. And I knew he valued that stuff. But when I really, you know, here is some coniferous trees. And then I did this one specially for him. There's a little abstraction in it. And it's got a sort of weird vibe, like it's supposed to mean something. I never really nailed down exactly what it was about, but didn't matter to him. He was the kind of person that would appreciate that for what it was. But I really understood what it was about, because I also do cartoons. And of course I drew that for him and sent that along. I was doing, like, they had bailed me out of, like, literally flaming out and becoming homeless again. And so I was paying them back. I was sending them, like, I think $50 a month, because that was as poor as I was. But when I sent them that, I also sent them a little cartoon. And that was to be given to Dad because he didn't know or care about the money stuff, and his values were never like that. But back when I was starting to do that sort of thing, I was on 4chan trying to be I guess we can call it what Loading Ready Run calls it, a draw friend. And made a bit of a mess there because I had no talent and was teaching myself how to do it on 4chan, where everybody would just flame you. And I had drawn pictures, including this one. That is a little kitty face. And I'm sure it was once posted on 4chan. It's a really bad drawing. That, like, this is not good. It's a bad cartoon. It's got a certain amount of something, but there's a lot that's just like, okay, this is wrong and sloppy, and it's all going wrong. And I just randomly gave that to my dad way back when I was first doing that, which is like, I don't know, 2007 or something. Little did I know, because I wasn't thinking of it at the time, he put that away in his bedside table and he kept it. And it didn't occur to me that he would do anything like that. And then, like, Mom told me about that at some point. I was, oh yeah, did you realize that he had this? And I was like, first of all, ew. Oh, it's just a horrible thing. And secondly, he kept this. Because, like, he, cared about good art. I have some other things that I can show you before I go on. My scientist dad painted this. This is his work. He's interested in collecting stuff. But when he was younger, he painted this. He was into, like, surrealist artists and things. And I'm not sure whether he was satisfied with it, but this is a pretty, I latched onto this because I was like, no, my dad painted that, and I'm going to put this in a proper frame of some kind. I'm going to keep this around because I like, it's this, like, image of the doors and these empty doors and going through this series of things. It's one of those other ones where it's like, I think this means something, but I'm not exactly sure what, but it means what it looks like and feels like. And he was very proud when I painted this. I won an art award when I was a kid. I was this little kid in my plastic snow jacket, and went to the Prudential Center in Boston because this had won an award in high school, freshman year, I think. I painted that, a girl in my art class who I was kind of sweet on. And, I made that happen. It's like 1982. It's dated. It's initialed and dated. And so that was me kind of trying that out. And that was something that he liked. And I already showed you the pogo stuff. And, my dad, this scientist guy, was captured by art. And I had drawn this little sketch, and rather than just chuck it or whatever, like, he kept it, but he kept it in a kind of a special place. He kept it in, like, this is in my bedside table close to where I sleep. And I got better enough that I could replace this with something like this, which is, a better cartoon face. It's using a technique on this floating pearl thing, which is like watercolor. And there's a certain amount of, like, the edges of the sphere have a highlight because there's an optical effect there, which makes it look more like a thing. And it's using, shading and 3D for that. And there's an expression on the face. And I had gotten together to try to learn how to do cartooning at one point, and part of it was because I knew that Dad valued it, and that I I've spent a lot of time being like, I've got to get through to my folks and have them value me, because they didn't really get with the I will have nothing but time and do my research. His dad maybe did, but he never really believed that I did anything. And my mom doesn't relate to any of this stuff all that well at all, or didn't. She's gone as well. And I did a comic that is no longer on the web. I've still got the scans of it. In fact, I still, about 7 feet away, I have all the original artwork for it, because most of it was being done on paper. And when I went back, and this is probably the last thing as far as showing you cool stuff, other than I can show you this too, because it's a picture of me. This is something that my mom had in the window. It's a 12-step thingy from actually A, but she's had it for a long time, and it's kind of pretty. It's one of the few times that I saw it where she liked something that had art on it. And I'm going to tack it up somewhere where it can be seen. But this is a picture of us, basically. This is me as a little tiny baby, and my dad when he was younger, and my mom when she was younger, as a little black and white picture. So this is Christopher Mayer Windows, and where I came from. And I've told lots of crazy stories about it, but you can kind of see how, these are my folks, and I love them. And my dad is an enormous nerd, but a brilliant, brilliant, enormous nerd. Yeah. The eyes are a little wild. He was kind of fierce, too. We all have had our challenges and stuff. People are interesting. If you dig into anybody, they start getting complicated. The stories that I've told, about my family kind of suggest some of their complication. And the path that I took towards... when they were down in Pennsylvania, where my sister was close to them and could, well, I am a lot like my mother. My other brother looks a lot like my dad, but I look a lot like my mom, and I am also the same kind of personality type and stuff, which is interesting. But when I got the chance, and this is my chance, I wanted to show you and do a little live stream, and then I'm also going to scan them and probably stick them on Instagram, because why not? I started drawing comics for my dad towards the end of his life, like in the last couple of years, that I did until I stopped because I couldn't think of anything to do. Like, I stopped with this one, where I did that, and I had a lot of stuff going on. Like, this was around when I was trying to get Patreon off the ground again, and I was getting fried trying to keep up with this stuff. But for, looks like 5 strips, I drew a comic strip just for my dad, where as long as he lived, it was going to be just only for him. And it's a little story kind of about characters that are it's just about being in a comic strip. And the first one is this one, where you turn on the light and the panel comes on. And then this guy's, and it's using very simple language because he was getting kind of really, really old, and he had some trouble with his dementia, and it needed to be able to reach him where he was at. So it's like, grade school reader sophistication, but it's telling its little story. Like this kitty fella comes through the panel, and he's making a world, and he's making a world by drawing the panels. And it's the sort of thing that my dad always liked. And then the next thing you know, he's not alone, because the guy is still trying to paint the panels. They're like, pillars or things, but the negative space has something in there, and it's curious, and it's sneaking through the gray scaling. The gray shades are watercolor graphite pencil. Like, they can be, you can use a water brush, and kind of melt the sketching so you can get all different kinds of shadings. And I strongly recommend that for if you're doing grayscale comicking and stuff. It's a great way to put different levels of gray down. And the kitty crawls up between the panels and pounces through, and Kitty is startled, but has a friend. I think I decided to call them like main kitty and soft kitty or something. You know, it's a little bit like they're a male-female pair, but it never actually went anywhere. And then they're doing a little riff on another cartooning thing. Little kitty is... And you'll notice that when I was working on it really hard, and it took me a long time to do each of these, so I had to stop because I was trying to get Patreon back off the ground, but I was doing this for my dad, so I just went to the limit about it. Kitty is looking from the background, and they found a house. Do you recognize this house? You should. My dad probably did, because I cloned the imagery exactly from another famous doghouse. In fact, that is why the one kitty is saying, "Why does it have a Van Gogh?" You know, why is there a Van Gogh? They're both looking into the comic, and then we see whose house that was. A what? Extremely frightened. Wrong house. And they're fleeing because this is a special doghouse. And I mimicked the house and the drawing of Snoopy as closely as I possibly could. Like really studied the hell out of it so that I could make it look and feel exactly right. And there's another thing, which is this WLV stuff is how Charles Schulz drew grass. At one point, I used the same thing that I use for plugin making. I can turn the same analysis to other purposes, and I wanted to work out how some of the great cartoonists got their effects, and the ways in which, like, the doghouse is drawn. Like, do the lines go all the way to the outside edge? Actually, no, they don't. They go in a certain way. There's a slightly darker line over here, and the grass is drawn with the W, V's, and L's. Except for in this, it's in perspective because they're running forwards, and this is larger. And Schulz didn't actually do that, but I'm using Charles Schulz grass. And that's something that my dad would probably have picked up on either consciously, because he may have worked that out for himself, or, you know, subconsciously. And then the last one I did before I burnt out on it and couldn't go forwards any further was Mr. Main Cat, who is building these comic panels, is breaking one by mistake. He has knocked it over, and Soft Kitty has observed that this is happening. Main Cat is panicking because it is falling apart. Soft Kitty has jumped outside the panel and is rescuing it, and then in the very end, they're fine. Main Cat is a little bit rattled by all of this, but Soft Kitty is like, I nailed it. And they're in a sort of TP-like structure, which is the remaining panel walls and stuff. So, you know, apart from this when I ran out of anything further to do, that was my little 5-strip dedicated cartoon that was solely for the purpose of sending to my dad so that he could have, you know, something to make his declining years more magical. I think it worked. And I certainly put everything that I had into it. Again, I spent a couple of years trying to be a cartoonist. You know, in fact, I did that. I spent a couple of years trying to be a cartoonist, not because my dad loved cartoons so much, although our whole family pretty much does, but because I had been listening to a podcast called Webcomics Weekly, which is Scott Kurtz, Chris Straub, Dave Kellett, Brad Geiger, in order of their self-importance, perhaps. And it made being a web cartoonist seem so cool that I just needed to try to do it. And so it took me from, you know, this to this. over the course of several years of trying to draw and then color or ink wash or whatever a daily web cartoon. And that's not on the web because it suffered from, what they call, I think, Cerebus syndrome, where it started out like, okay, it could just be jokes. Let's try doing this, and let's try doing that, and let's try being really serious. And that particular comic went through all those things, all the things I had to discover about who I even was as a cartoonist that were shown by the ones that I did for my dad at the end of his life, that took full advantage of everything that I've learned about how I relate to that art in terms of making it. Like, I'm not a black and white cartoonist. I'm not a color cartoonist. I'm a grayscale cartoonist with certain preferred media as far as the kinds of grays and shading and stuff that I use. And also play heavily with panel borders and things like that. I really like the fooling with the panel borders and stuff. And I did, a couple of years of trying to do that daily. And this is while I was doing air windows at the same time. Like, all of these things that are side things, even when they're to an enormous level, it's all at the same time as well. I am doing air windows and kind of just barely holding my head above water with that, which has been going on for many years, but kind of by design, because I needed to also be doing this other stuff. And yeah. So that's more or less, unless I was to scamper around digging stuff up, or I don't know, I'll take a moment, and when we get back, you can ask me some questions about, and I like having these little heartwarming meetings. They might not fill up an entire live stream, though. Also, among other things, I've been wanting really hard to somehow update my phone, which is an antique iPhone 4S that will not run Instagram, and I badly want to be able to run Instagram because I can do air window stuff with it. Like, I could be making or building something like this modular sequencer thing, if I was able to use Instagram without it crashing all the time on the antique phone. I would be able to be throwing stuff on Instagram all the time, and just like, it's like Twitter, but for people who don't have literally word things to say. If I had a camera and a phone and stuff which was able to do like nice close-up pictures of these things and so on, and just dump images from my life as it's transpiring out into just that form of social media, I'd be able to do it lots. I've done it a little bit, and the reason I'm not doing it more is because it's extremely cumbersome, and the Instagram application like crashes 8 times for each time that I try to make a picture and then post it. And it's very limited as to how I can use the application, because any little thing that I do will make the application fall over and die. And it would be nice to also do video occasionally. People are constantly posting, like modular synthesizer people are posting like, here's the new thing that I'm building, and it's blasting through their speakers and stuff. And, I would be doing that if I could, and it would be a really perfect match, and that's the way that I like to engage with these things. That's all, folks. Engage with these things. Because, it's easy, it's sort of quick and immediate and stuff. And my sister, her and her husband are doing pretty good, because the way things work out, they were able to get that house because my family, sold our house in Lexington and ended up reasonably well fixed up. So they did things like get a comfortable, good place to live. And my sister got a house really nearby. And part of the way that worked out was that most of what we were doing for like inheriting money from the folks, they put into buying that house. So they don't really get anything more from at least the direct, any of the bank accounts or whatever. but they don't have a mortgage payment if it's paid off. And I think it might be. And so they were just out getting phones, and they're on the most current iPhone, and which means that my mom's old phone is still available. And since Sarah had just gotten a phone 2 generations newer than this, she really didn't need the old phone, but the old phone is 3 generations newer than mine. So part of my job tomorrow is to go and get it transferred from my super old phone to this not really all that old phone, but it's like 2 generations old. And I know this is going to be able to run Instagram. And so once I do that, you're going to start seeing Instagram posts about all the little stuff that I do, because there's no reason to not just flood stuff into that. Like I don't keep a cell phone account with the data plan and all that kind of stuff, because like right now it is simply too expensive for me to do that. I can't afford like a cell phone account that lets you do smartphone things. So I have a prepaid account. I've got a T-Mobile prepaid thing, mostly because I figured they would let you do that and then not use it, and it'll still be there month after month after month without paying anything more. And I'll continue to hang on to that as much as I can. But if this works with Wi-Fi, it means that I can do the smartphone things, including the Instagram stuff in here. So yeah, it ain't exactly new, but this is going to solve that problem, and it might solve it really quickly, in which case you'll start seeing lots of Instagram posts, and that'll be kind of neat. And eventually I'll have to figure out, like, how do I download stuff off of Instagram so that I can archive it, because you can't trust them to hold it. You know, look at what happened to MySpace. You know, years of people putting their bands, music, and stuff up on MySpace, and if they didn't keep their own backups, oops, it's all gone. So there's that. But yeah, I'm working on getting that going. There is an even older Apple iDevice. It's currently sitting over there charging. You'll probably end up seeing it soon enough, maybe even by tomorrow if all goes well. I'll need to find a way of taping it to the wall, basically. But it is a first-generation iPad. And as long as a first-generation iPad can run the very same little window that you're currently being shown in on my live stream, if like that iPad can show what I'm seeing on which the live chat right there, all of a sudden you will be part of the music streams, because I can put it up somewhere where I can see it while playing music, which doesn't mean I will necessarily start doing everything you say in it. Even less does it mean, yeah, I've got plenty of those. Everything that I have that is an iDevice is still 30-pin cables. I'm going to have to get a special cable just for this one, because this is the first thing I've had that is beyond 30-pin cables. But with the first-generation iPad there, and it has a little monogram on the back, and it says, "To Jerry from Kathy." My mom got that from my dad many years ago. If that can be made to do enough internet and web, like if it doesn't have Wi-Fi, I'm a bit out of luck, but I think it probably does. I'll be able to have the chat up, and that'll mean a number of different things. All it needs to do is show a web page. I don't need it to do anything else. I mean, it's possible that I'll start doing things with it. I mean, I don't know. We'll find out. I bet it's very limited as to what kinds of iOS it can run. But all it needs to do is be able to do a relatively simple popped-out web page. And then we will have chat for the Tuesday music streams. And there are a number of cool ideas around that. Now, I'm going to give you a second to maybe think of plugin questions before we run out of time. And I'm going to go and fuss with the fire, because I believe it is going to be about done. Oh my God, that's amazing. I think it even melted the nail. I'm not sure that's true. Maybe it just went somewhere that I didn't see it, which is quite possible. It's possible that indeed that ship went to join my dad and taking the nail with it, which I would have thought would be left over. I'll find out. If it's left over, I'll have it kicking around for a future stream or something. So here we are. I've got about 40 minutes or so left on the stream, and I'm going to look up Cush Audio Clariphonic because that is the question. I think that's actually not the first time you've asked that. You just asked me that before. Let me answer it properly this time. Yes, by all means, copy and paste questions I didn't answer, especially if it's like it scrolled off the top of the screen, because I need to see it on the screen to be reminded of it. Let's go and look that up. It's possible it's not the kind of plugin that I make, but we'll find out. I might want to go to the Sound on Sound review. Okay, so I see. Yeah, low pass has some of that. This. Yes, I am using an ad blocker. Piss off. This review is about the hardware. Broadly based tone shaping EQ. I'm looking at the hardware because it's like, well, if this is actually about hardware, then fine, I'll just pay attention to that. I'm very strongly motivated to both be into hardware and make it accessible for other people. So, there's that. Although I do have hopes of getting stuff together where I start doing digitally based stuff again. In terms of my making music, it might not necessarily be streams, and maybe it will be. I'm not sure. I mean, it depends upon whether, like, one of the things that would probably make that happen more easily is if I got a more current computer. Is I've got a pretty respectable iMac doing this streaming right now and taking in the camera and showing me this stuff. If I'm able to update that to something that is more current, for instance, the newest Mac Mini runs faster than any other Mac at all, including the Mac Pros. It just blows everything away. So if you can get outboard kit that will fill in some of its missing gaps, like, a GPU and stuff, then it's a fairly obvious call. Like, okay, if you want to do top of the line, boom, it's the new Mac Mini. In which case I would have a fairly decent iMac kicking around, and I could sit over on top of the Rhodes and be a dedicated multi-tracker. And that might be kind of cool, is working with a relatively modern computer, and I have a 16-channel interface, so I'm capable of setting that up as well. Maybe come up with a way of building it into a rack system so that the interface could be sort of part of the same unit. But in whichever way, having a reasonably powerful computer that is dedicated to being a multi-tracker, and then probably learning how to make a Reaper be that multi-tracker, because as much as Logic is cool, I'm used to it. It's better for demoing things for the plugins, because the plugins are, audio units and look a little better on Logic than they do than the VSTs do in Reaper. Doing that would let me start developing what it can mean to do what it can mean to do multi-track recording in the digital world, because I think many things that people do are either unhelpful or unnecessary, and it really should be possible to devise either new DAWs or new ways of working with DAWs that take you to different places. Because what current DAWs do, with their whole very computerized and very organizational, what current DAWs do is organize things so that you can like mix by the grid and synthesize stuff. And I think that there are other places that can go. I firmly believe that when you capture audio with a decent modern converter, like I'm pretty happy with my Motu 16As. It's not quite Lavery grade, but for the price, it's absolutely starkly amazing. You should be able to use a computer as a simple tape machine, capture stuff using a nice high quality converter like that, and run the DAW like a tape machine, and then play stuff out of the same kind of converter. It's 16 tracks in and out. Play stuff out the converter and do further mixing and doing stuff in analog to the extent that people want to, because it's also possible I'll be able to develop the plugins until it really, there's all this different kinds of stuff that you can do. But I should be able to start playing with the DAW as sophisticated tape machine thing and see what I can get out of that. Because there's potential. Like the studio that I have here, because I've got outboard, because I've got the analog mixing, in fact, I have literally a 16-track mixer. Not all the tracks are in great shape, but that's what I'm doing for the modular stuff. And I intend to build mixers and work out how to do that and then show people how to do it. For those who can't afford a Roland M16, which is a $200 mixer, if that. I do have the one rack unit of API, so I can capture stuff, and I only need to do so many tracks at a time to build up a project in the digital audio world. It's as if you had 16 or 32 or 64 tracks of API, because as long as you have enough pre's to be able to capture what it is you're doing. And I like capturing drums with fewer mics, so that's also good. Yeah, this could all go to the place where I get the opportunity to start experimenting with some of these things in a more sophisticated way. And, hey, when I get this going, Instagram will start having it all. And it'll always be about trying to inspire people to do more with what they've got as well. And I'll see whether maybe there's, I'll find out whether it's worth it to do some of these things and then, on the computer, mix them in the box and produce stuff that way. Because I have I'm trying to build analog stuff that is such a high bar to clear that the digital in-the-box stuff can't get there. And then I take the plugins and I try to make the digital in-the-box stuff get there. And then once I've got them, and I'm pretty happy with them, I'm going back to the analog stuff and going well, I should be able to do more with this. And so on and so forth. Because that's what I grew up on. I grew up on, mostly Tascam tape, cassette, multi-track, and silly things like that. But I like getting back to the stuff that I knew about. So yeah, back to the Clariphonic. I went over to the Clariphonic. Here's what I'm going to do. I cannot take all of these words and use them. I cannot do that for you. Crush Audio did the creative work of doing apparently what's a bunch of fairly simple high shelves. He says that there's no booster filters. Well, high shelves are filters. But the layout of the circuitry here might be a fairly simple thing of just capacitors. In which case, what you would be doing is this. You would be trying to match whatever the things are in here with existing simple air windows EQs that have wet dry. Because part of this is being about having simple, they're talking about parallel signal paths. Well, wet dry can do that for you. And multiple parallel EQs can do that kind of thing for you. It's not that the stuff I do isn't comparable to Cush Audio Clariphonic. It's that Cush Audio Clariphonic seems to have the same value system that I do, so you shouldn't have too much trouble finding stuff. If you're looking for, am I using all of the Cush Audio terms and knobs with the same labels on it, I'm not going to do that for you. Cush gets to continue to have that. I'm not going to try to copy their thing. But let me have a quick look at capacitor, for instance. That is one of my better sounding filters. I'm going to have a quick glance at the capacitor code and see whether I've got wet dry in here. I've got 3 controls, so signs point to yes. It also has control smoothing for all of the parameters. Yep. You should be looking into capacitor. You should be looking into my recent low pass and high pass. If you're looking for stuff that'll do what Cush Audio Clariphonics does, I could do some of those isolating of things. And then what you're going to want to do is use the wet dry control as part of the configuration. Assume that it's part of what Cush is doing with the Clariphonic stuff, because it is a parallel signal path. Wet dry is a parallel signal path. And this stuff is also all going to be zero latency, zero samples latency. Because in order to be able to work with the wet dry, it kind of has to be. If you have a zero latency dry signal, then everything that you do is going to have to do that. In particular, I can think of some stuff that would be dead on exactly what you're looking for. I'll tell you how to do it. Here's what you're going to want to do. And let me get a little feedback here. I'm going to scroll up, have a glance. Yep, do I have something similar to this? Apparently, literally what I just released yesterday is similar to this. Parallel EQ, yep, check. Hardware EQ, software, yep. Software few later. DSP tech I want to explore in future. I'll be talking about that literally all the time. I want to do a bunch of modular DIY stuff. But as far as DSP tech, that's literally all I do. So the next thing that I have in mind beyond releasing stuff like Brass Rider and Smooth, which are in the line, is I want to start combining bus colors with console. I'm going to have dedicated console versions that have to be used the way console is, but they take the bus colors algorithms and split them up, meaning that the algorithms start being affected by the same mechanisms that happen in console. I have not figured out exactly how I would do it, but bus colors uses those, the convolution colorations, and then it manipulates them based on the loudness to react differently depending upon how hard you're driving the internal thing. If I can combine that with console, I'll be able to produce amazing sounding virtual consoles in a bunch of different flavors. And they'll come out one at a time because they will be kind of like it makes the distinct individual plugins too large and cumbersome to be loaded with all this freaking stuff. Also, it means that you could mix and match them, which you wouldn't be able to do in a single one. So it'd be kind of like, okay, I take no responsibility for if you're mixing and matching these, but see whether you have fun. And it'll be a couple of months to turn them all out because it's a bunch of work going into that, and it will mean essentially all the bus colors things plus anything else I can find of that nature will turn into console versions that also have a different type of behavior, because since it's kind of altered and affected, what'll happen is it'll go back from the bus colors implementation to what used to exist in the character plugins, which had less of a time constant for how things affected the dynamics. And with this new context, that was always kind of relevant. It'll become incredibly relevant. So yeah, we have lots of new DSP tech coming. It's going to be pretty exciting. When I have this going on, it's going to be very exciting. Yeah, so up a little bit, upper mid-range. Yeah, here's what you're going to want to do. I'm gonna highlight that for a moment before I go on to other things. Here is my final answer for getting stuff that works like what you like about Clariphonic. Here's what you need to do. Capacitor is very good as far as bandpassing things in a more aggressive way. That's not really what Clariphonic is about, but I still have stuff that'll work for you that way. What you're going to do is for a push forward upper mid range, you're going to use high pass. Specifically, it has to be high pass 2, the one that I released yesterday. So this is why you're not already doing it, is because it didn't exist before Sunday. You're going to use the, you may or may not be using the loose tight controls. Like if it helps you, that's fine, but you can just leave that on 0 and be fine. You're going to set the cutoff until it is focusing on the upper mid-range, and you're going to set the poles so that it will go between like full dry, which is no poles, to 4 poles would be isolating a particular area with the steeper cutoff, basically. And you'll work out exactly how much isolation you want on the area. The lower number of poles you use, the more gentle and slow the slope is. And if you're using fewer poles, you're also running through less math, which is not necessarily what Clariphonic is doing, but mine is made to do that. So if you can get by with 1 pole or 1.5 poles or 2 poles, set it to like 1.9 or something to be sure, you can be guaranteed that you're running through only what circuitry, only the algorithms that are needed to do that much and no more. It will not run the 3rd and 4th pole unless you need to use them. At that point, you've got an isolated upper mid-range that is too much. At that point, simply use the dry-wet control. Go full dry, sneak in however much of this push of the upper mid-range you want, and it will be very smoothly and effortlessly, and it will sound absolutely as good as Clariphonic, unless they're doing something that is some kind of funky analog modeling extra coat of paint. And, I'm not sure that's necessarily so. If they're successfully modeling stuff that is like the probably very simple circuit in the hardware unit, they're probably using very simple algorithms. It might not be, literally mine, but mine have a special thing going on that theirs might not have, which is this. If you were pushing the upper mid-range in that way, and I demonstrate this in the video, if you were using high pass 2 to push the upper mid-range that way, so you're isolating it, you're using the poles to make the slope as much as you want, and you're setting the cutoff and so on. You may or may not be using tight and loose at all. You might want to leave that off if you're really going for just only the most subtlest stuff, because it's kind of black art. There is no formal way of figuring out how you're supposed to use tight and loose because it's a weird parameter that other people don't have. So you might just want to ignore it for this. Full wet on that will start rolling off just before Nyquist, because air windows filters of this type are interleaved. They have a separate IIR for each one, meaning that they can get much like 2 poles of this would be the equivalent of 1 pole of regular IIR. In fact, if the Cush Audio stuff is designed with the simplest form of IIR for maximum clarity and openness, then what you'd be doing is choosing 2 poles of the Air Windows one to match it, and then it'll have the same roll-off. But what the Air Windows one does that the Cush Audio would not be doing is it goes up to the maximum boost, and then as it nears the Nyquist frequency, the high pass rolls back off again, which is what you would want from an analog sounding filter. You would want an analog sounding filter that was trying to be like, okay, let's bring some luscious high frequency boost that is natural as anything. You don't want it to aggravate the high frequencies of the digital sampling theorem. You'd like it to focus on the stuff that sounds like highs and then cut off before it starts doing weird stuff that sounds like digital. So High Pass 2 from literally yesterday is exactly what you would want for this purpose. Give it a try. It should do great. Now let me see what other people are saying. I constantly feel like I need more and more analog equipment, but that's just because I love it so much. But the thing is, I've mentioned before that that's all very good, but if like my house burned down or an asteroid fell out of the sky and smushed it all flat, and I had music and gear and plugins in the cloud, I would have those things and I could keep going. So I do love the analog kit and like literally physical guitars and things like that. And I love the little circuit boards and building things out of chips. I love all that stuff. I want to make it more affordable and more approachable for people so that, and do the whole like right to repair stuff where you are allowed to solder things. I have a soldering iron, actually 2 soldering irons. One of them is a soldering gun, which may or may not still be working, and a wire stripper that I got out of my dad's basement and toolkit that should help greatly for me doing this kind of work. I won't be stripping wires with my teeth anymore. Everything will go a lot faster, and it's a better soldering iron than any other one that I've got. I'll be doing that kind of stuff, but I also see the value of doing the things in plugins so you can have the same analog magic. You can have like what you're doing with this Clariphonic. Now there's an Airwindows plugin that should give you the same thing. And having all of those in the box as open source so they can't be like licensed, DRM'd away from you when that's bad. I don't trust in the box for certain things. In the box, I'm kind of with Steve Albini in that I saw a video by him a little while back before I went out to the family house, and he went on in great lengths about how digital is garbage and useless and you should only use analog tape because all the digital formats will just go away. The digital formats are just these arrangements of bits, and companies will not release the information and they won't maintain the things, and you see that happen all over the place. Like, you can't compile stuff for Power PCs on modern Macintoshes with the Xcode. They discontinued that stuff. I have to use the old stuff to do what I do because I can't start upgrading with like Apple technology to do all the newest things. This is also why I can't do the iPad, the iOS version of audio units, is because you have to use recent stuff to do that, and that would obliterate all of my retro support. I'm not prepared to take responsibility for maintaining a newest, latest, greatest, keeping up with the updates programming system when stuff gets thrown away out of it. Stuff that I'm using gets thrown away out of it. All that stuff is not okay. So that's the downside for digital, is that if you're not taking care of those things, they will ruin everything for you. They will throw away the compatibility and make it so that you can't have your stuff. You can't have your music. You can't have your plugins because the DRM says no, or it's not maintained, or it's not supported on this operating system. And it all just deteriorates because there's a financial incentive to sell more stuff, to sell newer computers, to sell newer copies of the software. And, a lot of the stuff that I'm doing with the Patreon is actively resisting that behavior. And I'm just like, no, you don't get to do that. I'm going to make things available for people who can't do that, or people that you're just pricing out of the world with this kind of stuff. So I do love analog, but I also intend to support the digital stuff and bring it because there are ways in which that can be, more special. Let's have a look at what's going on here. Bo's surprised I'm not using Reaper. I may very well start using Reaper. I didn't get on with it when I tried it previously. Also, I'm not sure whether or not I've ever paid for it. It's not expensive, but if I dove heavily into it, I'd want to, here's the thing. If I start doing, find some good demo files and go, oh, I know how to do this now, if I start doing VSTs with GUI, so that they would, first of all, not run on Logic, so I couldn't use Logic to demo them, and second of all, they would run on Reaper, on Mac, and Linux, and Windows, and all that kind of stuff, and presumably run on many other things, but mostly I'd be caring about that they would work on Reaper because that's what I would be supporting primarily. And Reaper has always had some issues with my plugins a little bit. They don't know how to count index numbers very well, for instance. But if I started making VST plugins with GUI, I'd probably switch over to Reaper for the purpose of demoing them. And then I would just switch over to Reaper entirely because it would be demoing them because they would look nice. And because Logic can't do VSTs. And if I was using Reaper just for myself, I would use the Air Windows VSTs all day long and not care that they look uglier than the audio units in Logic, because I don't care what they look like. Like, if they're doing what I want, that's fine. Some of my plugins don't even have interfaces to show. So Reaper doesn't pose a problem. It's just that when I'm doing new generic plugins and I have to demo them for YouTube, I kind of need to pick the Logic version because it shows sliders and stuff, but Logic supports generic stuff better. It has longer words. Reaper's the VST format as I'm given to use it has 7 characters for all labels, so all the labels wind up looking stupid. And I do that just to maintain compatibility as much as possible. But it does mean that the demoing doesn't look as nice if I was using the VSTs as they currently stand. I'd have to be doing the graphic user interface VSTs. But I mean, on the flip side, if I started doing that, I could start just doing my plugins over again, but this time with graphic user interface VSTs, still free as open source, and just put it all on everything exactly the way that I'm doing it. Because people would need me to be doing that because nobody's running around doing it for me. But people would enjoy it. People would like seeing that happen. And, enough else has changed over the years that who can say? So, yeah, my eye is on Reaper. That is where I'm going when I stop using Logic. Envelope followers is modulators and plugin effects, integrated envelope followers. That's a good point. I can do things like that. Gatalope does things like that. I've done stuff like that. Yeah, Gatalope does a thing kind of like that. Yeah, if you like that idea, keep showing up to these streams and keep reminding me. Just point it out because I'm reading what you're saying here, and I'm like, yup, that's good. I like that. I mean, hell, the low pass 2 and high pass 2 literally have integrated envelope followers in them, in a sense. Because keeping track of how loud the waveform is a kind of envelope follower. And what it's doing is modulating the cutoff frequency by how loud you are in the waveform. And particularly since it's a really slow IIR filter, that literally, I have the last 2 plugins that I put out literally have exactly what you like. So cool. It is just slightly less underused now that I've just put out 2 plugins that use it. So let's see, ITB, yeah, no, cool. I relate to people that like switching over all to in the box. My job is to make sure that the plugin companies and OS companies and computer companies don't screw you over completely with it. Because the challenge within the box is also they can take everything away from you for no reason or by mistake or just because they pushed the wrong button. Hello MySpace, or goodbye all the music that was on MySpace before 2000 and what? 2011 something, 2005. Yep. Yeah, there will be a holo console. It won't be the first one, but there will be one. Table with tags. Yeah, I have tags in WordPress. I'm probably not going to stay forever on WordPress because I need to be going to a dedicated server. But yeah, the tagging element is something that's always going to need to be there, I think. And It is possible to start adding stuff. Like if people know that I've got that list of tags on the side of the Air Windows website, and it's things like, compressors, consoles and tapes, EQ and stuff. If people can think of another tag that's really important for them, and I think maybe distortion might be a good one to add, I will add that tag and then go through everything on the site and correctly label all the things so that you can click on the word and be delivered all of the plugins, both Patreon and pre-Patreon, that relate to that. So I will add new tags if people want them. It's just a matter of 2060. It is just a matter of adding them to the website, and it's a certain amount of work, but I'm not really scared by work. I just don't randomly do it when there's so many other things for me to do. I agree that Reaper is a little harder to get into because I found it hard to get into, but then at the same time, it's like, yeah, I'm sure you're right, because that's how it's been for me. I no longer have a current Photoshop because it's Creative Cloud, and I'm not dealing with that. But back in the day, I installed Photoshop off of floppy disks on a 33 megahertz computer. In fact, I still have the disks. I have a copy of Photoshop for Macintosh Performa 575. Runs on 68K computers. You can fit the entire thing into 6 floppies. And it wasn't immediately clear to me, and I stuck with it, and now I have Photoshop by heart, and I know how to use it, and I can no longer run it in current computers because the versions that I have that work are, obsolete. They don't run with current operating systems. There's your problem right there. So, yeah. Thomas, before I scroll past you, Clariphonic for the focus. Clarity, same deal, dude, same deal. If it is a high frequency boost, isolate the high frequency boost. If we're talking about airband on mag or clarity, I'm going to suggest that what that's going to mean is more along the lines of take it to a higher pitch. The filter frequency is going to go a lot higher. And then rather than using a smaller number of poles, crank it up. 4 poles, pin it to the max, and then adjust the filter until you're only getting the delicatest little highs there, and then use your dry wet to add that. And it'll still do the thing where it's rolling off just before Nyquist, so it'll still have an analogy, warm natural quality and not sound digital ever. But that's what you're going to do. You're going to use more poles for a tighter isolation on it, like an airband. I think that stuff that you're talking about, focus for fewer bands, that's fine. Anytime they're talking about doing an airband boost, you're going to be talking about higher Q. You're going to be talking about more poles of filtering, and it's going to be a steeper cutoff, because otherwise you start just getting mid-range with it, and it's no longer just a tight little airband boost. So yeah, for trying to do that label, and that label continue, Kush gets to have that label. I'm not going to put out a thing that presets that are designed to mimic what the Kush thing does. Never will I do that. I don't think that is valid or nice or good. But if you ask me, I'll tell you that clarity is going to be higher numbers of poles, push the filter higher, same deal, with just dry wet in the bottom, and start with dry and include as much of the wet as you need. You see, Bo, I am going to be leaving Logic because of its sound libraries and soft synths. I am looking forwards to being able to delete it and everything that it has and not return to it again. And that is because recent versions of Logic, and I know somebody told me oh, mine doesn't do that. I'll tell you how to not do it, but I wasn't successful. Logic seems to insist upon being here, you need all this, and then making me install gigabytes upon gigabytes upon gigabytes of loops, many of which are cruddy, rubbish loops. But they're assuming that I'm going to be just putting stuff together like Tinker Toys, and what I want from a digital audio workstation is I want something that acts and feels and works like a tape machine. I don't want to be doing a lot of moving. Like, ideally, I won't even have guidelines and stuff, bar lines and things. I want it to run like an analog tape machine, where you don't get the numbers and the bars and things. Instead, you get it going, and then you have to hear what's happening and work with that. If I want stuff to be synchronized and on the beat, I'll use my modular synthesizer stuff to make backing tracks to play along to. That's how that should be done. So exactly, it's like I should be able to make Reaper do that, because the whole reason it's daunting is because it's so flexible. It's like programmer design programs where you can make it do literally everything, if you know it that well, because you have to configure everything. And you either have to configure everything, or everything is available to be configured and you don't know what any of it means. And that's why it's daunting. So yeah, it'd probably be a good idea for me to do that, to get into Reaper and learn how to simplify it and boil it down to a stage that is a lot more approachable and can be used in that way. Because I've learned how to work that way in Logic, and I'm still like shoving things out of the way. Like, no, I don't want elastic audio. Switch off, No, I don't want this. And I like turning on all of the options for like your advanced feature settings, but often that just means stuff I don't want to use. And if it doesn't, advanced feature settings can mean like, do multi-track recording, because some of these programs are like, we're really GarageBand. So basically your primary way of engaging with music is to take loops and juxtapose them. And I'm like, no. And when you have stuff like advanced settings, often it's things like that. It's like, allow the computer to take in and spit out MIDI sequencing at the same time. It's like, but that's what I thought one of the primary functionalities. Like, Logic was always good with MIDI. And that combined with the really arcane stuff that's just confusing is the expert stuff. And then the basic stuff isn't, this is a simple tape machine. The expert stuff is Fruity Loops. I'm looking for something that is different than that, and I'm going to see whether I can make it happen. So yeah, last couple of minutes. Let's see what we've got here. Cleaning out the big libraries. I make some downloadable library type stuff, but and I'm glad of it, because I've in my modular stuff I have often used backbeats that were my own drum sample recordings. But it'd be also nice to be able to overlay just a drum recording. I've got a relatively soundproof room up there, and I can do that. Yeah, I'll take in a couple extra minutes to talk about the Studio One if we get to that, because that's worth mentioning. Actually, I think we're talking about different things. Anyways, yeah, presets with Blue Cat's patchwork. I recently praised Blue Cat in a thread on Gearsluts. They were like, who are the unsung heroes of plugin development? And one person was like, Air Windows. So I was like, aw. And I jumped on the thread, but not to praise myself. Instead, I jumped on the thread because somebody else had mentioned Blue Cat, and I replied to that. I was like, endorsed. Blue Cat supports plugins so well. Guillaume, who is Blue Cat's programmer, possibly their only one, I'm not sure, took the time to get audio units right and talked to me about it. And we had a discussion years ago, that was you, in which he was like, okay, well, what do I need to do? Because if this is not working right, I'd like to be supporting all of this correctly. And you're saying it's part of the audio unit spec. And I'm like, yes, it is. Here's the flag for logarithmic display. Here's this, here's that. And he made all of it work. If you're using Blue Cat stuff to host plugins in, you can put Air Windows plugins that have logarithmic knob behaviors, and it'll be drawing a little a graphic line. What am I talking about? Blue Cat Patchwork and stuff like that uses knobs. It has GUI knobs. So it'll use knobs for the Air Windows plugins. And then it'll take the motion of the knob and apply the logarithmic control that it needs to apply for the generic plugin. So you get a knob, but the knob is also being implemented in a way that is more sophisticated than those people just do with the sliders. It's great. What's not to like? I really am a big fan of that guy. The only thing he's done that I didn't like all that much was he's developed a way of building your own plugins, which is like, I don't know, plugin patch or something like that. And he wanted me to sort of endorse it or work with it or something like that. And like many of these things, because there's a guy who has incorporated all of my plugins into his open source project, which is about, build your own sample libraries. And the funny thing about that is that when people do this stuff, they're like, this is the musician-friendly, user-friendly way of making your own plugins, and you can make your own plugins and sell them. And I'll look at that stuff because I'm like, do your own GUI? That'd be kind of cool. I have never managed to do that. And I'll be looking at their thing, and it won't make any sense, and I won't be able to figure it out, and I won't be able to use it. And that's what happened with the Blue Cat thing. A plugin script, I think, Blue Cat has. And he's got a build your own plugins thing. And he was like, you should do your plugins on my system. Then you can have all of your plugins in granted and interpreted language or something. And do all the math with those. And then you get all of the GUI ever. I tried it. I couldn't make it work. I guess I'm just dumb. But I'm dumb in useful ways because I can do useful things through making stuff happen anyway. And then when I can make it happen, anybody can understand it. But I was not able to understand plugin script. I was not able to understand Hui or Hua or whatever it was that was the sample player thing that incorporates all of my plugins as open source. You can use my stuff quite legally in sample player things that you make with this other guy's setup, and it is partially open source. It's open source enough that he gets to use the MIT license stuff, and he's crediting me. But he's also making commercial licenses available in case you want to use it to build things that you then only sell commercially and don't open source. So you pay him in order to get the license to generate plugins that are themselves open source. And he can only do that because my stuff is MIT licensed. If I was GPL licensed, he could not. But my stuff is MIT licensed. So that is perfectly legit. All I can say is, if you need to credit me, then that's helpful, and people need to be trying to do that. But yeah, none of these simplified musician-friendly things that people have done, including ones where it's like a brilliant guy like Guillaume who supports my stuff so well, or the other guy with the sample libraries who literally uses my stuff as part of his package. I can't figure any of those things out, so I've given up so far. If I can do VCV rack, and I'd kind of need a more powerful computer to do it. This is the one that I've got is actually not really powerful enough to quite do that. And VCV rack is just a replication of stuff that I'm doing in analog anyway. I don't feel it is really quite to the point where I can do stuff as big as I can do in the analog realm. But it's probably where that's going. VCV rack is probably the future for doing the synthesis stuff, but in the box. Anyway, we've gone past one. I mentioned, I was thinking, I thought you meant Softtube Console 1, and I was going to snark on about how they stole the name from console. Studio 1, so that's basically, you're saying that's another DAW. That's cool. Maybe I'll have a look at it at some point. I like Reaper because Reaper is the Linux available one, and it's got somewhat wider range. But who knows? Maybe Studio One will catch on and become super popular at some point. Interesting. One final word on the Kush Audio Clariphonic. Some of the stuff that they're doing here, the shelves, Presence Sheen, Shimmer, and Silk, and stuff like that. You have to know what you're doing to replicate that in Air Windows, because Air Windows at 44K is not going to provide an option for a 39K roll-off. You'll have to run at a higher sample rate to do that. So if you want this silk filter in a plugin and you want to use high pass 2 to do it, you're going to have to run at a higher sample rate so that 39K is accessible. And that's it for the comments on Clariphonic. And final thought on VCV Rack is 64-bit or not is no big deal, I think, because it's got an adequate enough bus. It's a little difficult for certain things. That's mostly memory addressing. And yeah, this is a problem that I also see, which is I don't think VCV Rack is usable on old notebooks. It's barely usable on my fairly recent iMac if you get complicated enough stuff going on. I hope to in my copious free time, right? I've been saying about how I wanted to get into that for some time, and I keep not doing it. We'll see. Maybe I'll look in on them again, and then it's like, now we have a really good way of building plugins, and then it'll become obvious. Or maybe it'll be like, certain weeks I'll be releasing a VCV Rack plugin because it's so different from the other plugins. Or I'll be doing like GUI VSTs, and then that will also include VCV Rack VSTs, but it won't be including the audio units because I'd be leaving those. I don't know. In any case, yeah, well, I'm trying to think of something snarky to say about Logic or Apple or yeah, I explained about how you can't compile things for PPC on modern Xcodes, and that's kind of a joke. Yeah, no, mostly it's not been about jokes because, or wait, no, here's the, like, what would be actually funny is if these were like random people. This isn't actually me. I just got this out of a newspaper. No, this is actually my parents, and this all of that stuff that I was telling you was true. There weren't any jokes, but the joke is that wasn't a joke. I don't know, too complicated. So, in that case, I will talk to you later, and I'll be doing the music stream tomorrow. And if you see an iPad on the wall, it's because I figured that out and got it to work. In which case, if you see an iPad on the wall that I can plainly see as I play, that will mean that the live stream music now has chat that I can see. But I won't be talking or responding. And I may be figuring out in future ways where you can signal stuff like, type this into the iPad and it will make the tempo slow down or speed up or something. But that won't be happening tomorrow. I might have the iPad with chat up tomorrow, and I might not. We'll see. In any case, I will talk to you later.